Odds are, if you are watching this video, you are completely unaware of the effects cell phones and Wi-Fi devices have on you mentally and physically. And guess what? They were designed to keep you in the dark about it. Do yourself a favor. If you're watching this on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, and are able to put it at least 3 feet away from you, then finish this video. I can prove that the government has known about the dangers of radio frequency radiation for at least 46 years, since 1971. I have gotten my hands on a declassified military document that details the effects and clinical manifestations of microwaves and radio frequency radiation on humans. Now, when you hear the term microwave, I'm not talking specifically about the microwave oven you cook food inside of. I'm talking about microwaves in the noun form. The actual microwaves. There are many devices that give off microwaves or RF radiation. Here are some of the most popular ones. Now, a lot of you are going to hear the damage that is caused by RF radiation, and think to yourselves, I have most of those. I'm going to sue the government for not telling me. Well, slow your horses, because this is where they got sneaky. They have slyly put precautions into the devices themselves, or the manuals that come with them. So, when you take them to court, they will look at the judge and say, we did our due diligence, and put warnings on the device or manual. It's not our fault the consumers didn't read the 500-page legal mumbo-jumbo that came with it. Therefore, we are not at fault. I didn't make this video so you could go after the government or companies and bring them to their knees. I made it to make you aware of the dangers and help you learn how to protect yourselves and your loved ones from further exposure. Let's start with the legal mumbo-jumbo. If you have an iPhone, the warning is already on your device, and you've probably never even looked at it. Don't feel bad, no one does, but they were counting on that. On your iPhone, go to Settings, then General, then About, then Legal, and there you will find a warning called RF exposure. The legal note explains the SAR, or specific absorption rate. This is the rate at which radiation is absorbed into your body. It goes on to say that the limit is 1.6 watts per kilogram in the USA, and as much as 2 watts per kilogram in other countries. They tell you was to reduce RF exposure, such as using the speakerphone, headphones, or similar accessories. They also warn that cases with metal parts could change the RF performance, making it no longer compliant with the exposure guidelines. It also says that they tested each band, but not all bands are available in all areas. Some can say that the men who created these devices knew exactly what was going on. That's why men like Steve Jobs would never allow his children to use iPads or iPhones. Bill Gates was also known to keep his kids at a safe distance from these devices. Clearly, they knew something that we don't. Here is a small list of the effects caused by RF radiation. It includes symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, nausea, depression, anxiety, fatigue, insomnia, pain, stomach problems, thyroid problems, immune system issues, altered ability for your body to filter sugar, eye issues, cataracts, heart palpitations, blood pressure issues, asthma, sinus issues, lung issues, skin rash, skin itching, skin burning, facial flushing. Now let me introduce to you the proof that shows the U.S. government has known the damage RF causes for almost 50 years now. In the description below, you will find a link to the report shown here that was released by the NMRI, or Naval Medical Research Institute. It's the reported biological phenomenon, or effects, and clinical manifestations, attributed to microwave and radio frequency radiations. It was released on October 4, 1971, with a second printing that had revisions released on April 20, 1972. It includes well over 2,000 studies, experiments, tests, and reports on the effects of these radio frequencies and microwaves on humans. Chapter 1, Section A, starts by mentioning the heating of organs. This means it will heat up the whole body. Like you are being put into an actual microwave oven. It will heat your skin, bones, bone marrow, lens of the eye, which causes cataracts, and corneal damage. Degeneration of genitals, heating of the brain, sinuses, and any metal implants inside the body. Section B talks about the changes in how the body functions, such as changes to muscle contractions, altering the size of your blood vessels, dilation of blood vessels, liver enlargement, decreased fertility, altered sex births, meaning a higher possibility of having a girl, altered menstrual activity, altered fetal development, decreased lactation, reduced urine output, and altered blood flow rate. This is continued from Section B of Chapter 1. Alterations to biocurrents of the brain, so altering electric currents of the brain. Structural changes of the brain. EKG changes, or electrical current changes in the body, sensitivity to light, sound, and smell. Changes in the eyes, dying of the heart tissue. Loss of body parts, dehydration, and an altered rate of calcification. At fatal levels of radiation you can even experience bleeding in the lungs, liver, gut, and brain along with the dying of all body tissues leading to death. Section C talks about the central nervous system. Things such as headaches, insomnia, restlessness, EKG changes, nerve disorders, brain lesions, reflex disorders, seizures, and convulsions. Section D covers the autonomic nervous system. It causes an altered heart rhythm, fatigue, structural alteration of the vagus nerve which controls the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. I find this page to be very interesting. There is so much change in the world right now when it comes to mental health. This could be the key that no one is talking about. Section F covers psychological disorders as a result of the exposure. It lists symptoms such as having a general bad feeling, depression, impotence, anxiety, lack of concentration, hypochondria, dizziness, hallucinations, sleepiness, insomnia, increased irritability, decreased appetite, loss of energy, scalp sensations, increased fatigue, chest pain, and tremor of the hands. Section G talks about behavioral changes such as avoidance and discrimination behaviors. Section H lists blood disorders such as changes in blood and bone marrow, changes in cells and a shortening of the cell's lifespans, increase of sugar, histamine levels, cholesterol and lipid levels, increase in the number of white blood cells. Section I talks about the effects of exposure when it comes to vascular disorders. It causes things such as blood clots and high blood pressure. On this next page, Section J mentions the enzyme and other biochemical changes. It mentions a change in activity of neurotransmitters and other enzymes. Changes in proteins, toxins, fungus, virus inactivation, and bacteriostatic effect. Tissue cultures killed, changes in the rate cells divide. Increased RNA in lymphocytes but a decrease in the brain, liver and spleen. Changes in lactic acid and creatinine. Plus high blood sugar. Section K talks about metabolic disorders. This includes sugar in the urine, increase of urinary phenol, alteration in the rate of metabolic enzymatic processes, and altered carbohydrate metabolism. Section L is about gastrointestinal disorders resulting in loss of appetite, pain, constipation, and altered secretion of stomach acids. Section M covers all the endocrine gland changes. This includes an altered pituitary function, hyperthyroidism, thyroid enlargement, increased uptake of radioactive iodine, altered adrenal cortex activity, decrease of corticosteroids in the blood and glucocorticoidal activity, and also a decrease of testosterone production. Section N discusses changes only seen under a microscope, such as cross changes and tubular epithelium of the testicles. On the last page, Section O talks about genetic and chromosomal changes. Exposure could cause chromosomes to be shorter, cause them to mutate, alter the cell to where it is missing the nucleus or chromosome altogether. It could also cause neoplastic diseases, also known as tumors. Section Q is where they put all the miscellaneous effects caused from exposure, such as sparking between dental fillings, metallic taste in the mouth, difficulty in treating syphilis, poliomyelitis, and skin diseases, loss or brittleness of hair, buzzing vibrations, pulsations, and tickling in the area of the head and ears, increase in sweat and spit, changes in the way implanted heart pacemakers operate, and changes in the circadian rhythm, also known as the internal clock. Another document I came across is a medical journal published in 2015 that talks about how microwave frequency electromagnetic fields, EMF, also known as RF, produce neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. It goes on to talk about the term used by the medical community known as microwave syndrome and its many symptoms, such as fatigue, headache, insomnia, impaired sensation, irritability, lack of concentration, and others. It mentions the two government reports from the 70s and 80s. One of which I mentioned above, from the NMRI. This paper basically states that they have found that microwave EMF and RF impacts the cells of our bodies, and they focus mainly on the impact to the nervous system. Their first topic covers the knowledge that pulsed microwave field exposure produced instantaneous increase in calcium calmodulin-dependent nitric oxide or NO. This in turn has a universal role in the release of neurotransmitters in the brain, and also the release of hormones by neuroendocrine cells. This suggests that the nervous system is likely to be highly sensitive to the microwave EMF or RF.
Another study on genetic polymorphism clearly showed that excess L-type VGC activity causes neuropsychiatric effects. Just glancing at Table 1 in the article, you can see the many disturbing findings from various experiments. In 2012, it showed an increase in susceptibility to bipolar disorder, depression, schizophrenia, autism, and changes in brain function and structure. In 2010, it showed an increase in both bipolar and schizophrenia. Another experiment from 2010 showed how it negatively influenced language production. In 2011, it reported many attention deficits. In 2012, it showed impaired facial emotion recognition. In 2013, it showed an increased activation of the amygdala during emotional processing. The amygdala is the part of your brain that controls emotions, behavior, and motivation. In 2014, it shows that there were effects on epidossic memory and retrieval. The article also states that the most extensive literature from the Soviet and the USA in the 1950s and 1960s had the same conclusions. The widespread histological changes were produced in neuronal and neuroendocrine tissues, and this damage becomes irreversible with extended exposure and time. Table 2 shows notes from these histological studies. It states that when elevated calcium ions occurs, it is highly damaging to the cell, leading in some cases to apoptosis. Apoptosis is a fancy name for cell death. It also shows how exposure is causing irreversible damage. One of the scientists also make a note saying that synaptic connections are known to be disrupted in autism, and suggests maybe autism is generated by EMF exposure. The paper states that the two U.S. government reports listed many neuropsychiatric effects of microwave RF, EMFs, and a third paper recognized the role of non-thermal effects on our bodies. The NMRI report listed 40 neuropsychiatric changes. The other government report from RAINS was released in 1981 by NASA, focused on occupational exposures to microwave RF, EMFs, with that literature coming from the US, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. There were no obvious differences from these different regions. The paper reports 19 neuropsychiatric effects. The third report from Bolin was released in 1994 by the U.S. Air Force. It focused on microwave RF, EMFs on humans. This report states experimental evidence has shown that exposure to low-intensity radiation can have a profound effect on biological processes. The non-thermal effects of RF, NMW, radiation exposure are becoming important measures of biological interaction of EM fields. There is a specific discussion where they talk about an experiment on anesthetized animals that awakened when their head was irradiated with MW, RF, EMFs. Section 6, of this article, talks about 26 epidemiological studies. It states that the most important of these is the Santini et al. From 2003, which is a study done on people living near cell phone base stations. Table 3, on page 47, shows these studies and their findings. I started to highlight the important parts but realized about 1/3 the way down I needed to just highlight the whole table. I do want to point out two big studies I personally think it's worth a read. The Conrad 2013 study talks about smart meter EMF exposure. For those of you who don't know what smart meters are, they are the utility meters that utility companies are putting on your houses and buildings that transmit signals to them, so they don't have to send someone out to read the meter. If your meter is digital, and not analog, then you have a smart meter. These meters produce burst signals, constantly throughout the day and are much more dangerous for you, than you realize. They send out a far greater amount of MW, RF, EMF, than other devices. For instance, here is a chart that shows how much more an EMF, smart meter blasts out than the typical devices. As you can see, a smart meter will put out 1,000 to 10,000 times more EMF than a cell phone, or 400 times more EMF than a router. Say no to smart meters. These machines aren't anything they will tell you they are. They are not green, private, safe, or healthy. The next study on this list, that I want you to pay attention to, is the very last one. Waldman-Silsom et al. From 2009, on digital TV signaling. Is it a coincidence that on February 11, 2009, the same year as this study, President Obama signed into law that all broadcasting had to go digital? Is it also a coincidence that 6 days later, 36% of U.S. full-power broadcasters had the equipment to transmit exclusively in digital? This law went completely into effect on Friday, June 12, 2009. Looking at the consumer side of this act, the U.S. government established a federally sponsored digital TV converter box coupon program. Think about that. What does the government give out for free? Phones, and this digital converter box coupon for your TV. Phones and DTV mean more MW, RF, EMF. I'll let you do the math. The author ends the paper by saying, with ever-increasing exposures in human populations, we have no idea what the consequences of these ever-increasing exposures will be. Now, let's take a second to talk about the children. I stumbled upon another medical journal titled, Why Children Absorb More Microwave Radiation Than Adults and the Consequences. Basically, children absorb more MWR than adults, because their brain tissues are more absorbent, their skulls are thinner, and their body sizes are smaller. The fetus is particularly vulnerable to MWR. This type of radiation destroys the protective layer, known as the myelin sheath, around the nerves in the brain. There are so many toys that are sending out MW, RF, EMF signals. Digital dementia is also being reported in school-age children. It also goes on to state that tumors or cancer induced in children may not be diagnosed until well into adulthood. They state that it is important to note that the existing legal limits for human exposure to MWR do not take into account the greater exposure to children. A 1996 study reported that MWR penetrated deeper into the brain of children than adults. A 2009 study reported that absorption by children is 2 times more, because the RF is closer, and the skin and bone layers are thinner. A 2010 study reported that when it comes to children, their hippocampus and hypothalamus absorbs 1.6 to 3.1 times higher, their cerebellum absorbs 2.5 times higher, and their bone marrow absorbs 10 times higher, MWF, than adults. 30 experts, from 14 different countries, reviewed the science, and 29 of them declared that RF, EMF, MWR, is a Class 2B carcinogen, or cancer-causing agent. When the journal talks about exposure limits, they are sure to include the fact that an enormous body of scientific studies was published, reporting risk well below the legal exposure limit. The limits have been in place, and unchanged, for 17 to 19 years, and are based on false premise. The limits were set so long ago, with the assumption that the effects from MWR exposure is short-term. There was no consideration for long-term exposures. Some of you are probably saying the FCC regulates all this, so you're safe, blah, blah, blah. Well, the FCC requires, for purposes of evaluating compliance with localized SAR guidelines, portable devices should be tested or evaluated based on normal operating positions or conditions. The problem is all the products give warnings that the devices should be operated at X amount of distance away. So your laptop shouldn't be on your lap, and your phone shouldn't be near your head when you're talking on it. So when the FCC tests the levels for the product, they do so at the X amount of distance away, because the manual states that is how they want the product used. Not very typical? When our children are using their tablets, most of the time they have them sitting directly on their lap, not 20 centimeters from their bodies. A study from Yale exposed mice in utero to MWR. It showed the mice were hyperactive and had impaired memory. They positioned a cell phone above each cage, ranging from 4.5 to 22.3 centimeters away from the mouse. The observed effect was similar to ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. A further study shows that children playing games for just 3 minutes per day on these devices had a significant risk for ADHD. 2 studies reported damage to the protective insulation around our nerves, also known as the myelin sheath. Other studies showed cell phone use by children reported a significant risk of brain and other cancers, including girls who had placed the cell phone into their bra, developing multiple primary breast cancers immediately beneath where the cell phone was placed. There was a 10 to 30-fold increased risk for parotid gland cancer, which is one of the 3 salivary glands in the face. It is the one immediately next to where a cell phone is held to the ear. The other 2 salivary glands remain stable. The average time between exposure to a carcinogen and the diagnosis of a resultant solid tumor is 3 or more decades. That's 30+ years. Another study showed how MWR damages sperm in the testis. Once again, cell phones are stored in your pocket, right next to your genitals. Your laptop is placed on your lap, and tablets are commonly placed on your lap. The study shows that not only did the MWR affect fertility, but the health and well-being of their offspring.